comment.
You mentioned that the statistics.
I'll get close to you so I can hear.
You mentioned the statistics don't actually support the idea that Europe is becoming Islamified. Where can we get hold of that information, those sorts of statistics?
Here you will see Euro-Islam-Info. Euro-Islam-Info data is a database, or it's a website with access to databases set up by American and European specialists. Right? It's got a wealth of information, right? And it also gives links to a lot of other places. Right? Two things about statistics. First, it's because the birth rate, which is the argument that is used, right, to argue for the Islamization of Europe, is in fact been shown by demography specialists to fall after 1 or 2 generations, right? So the first reaction, same thing in all countries that have immigration, right? Initially, people feel isolated, right? And they also come from traditional cultures, right? And they, will tend to have more children because the women also are not educated, right? And then the second generation, that will change. And the birth rate will tend to align with what is the birth rate of the host country, right? So that is the major argument. But there are also other, but I'm not a demographer. But you might find, and I think you will find in that database.
Question here.
In the 60s, Charles de Gaulle, when they had the crisis in Algeria, and it was offered to make Algeria part of mainland France, de Gaulle said no, because there would be a massive increase in the number of Muslim French people, and then the French would be in a minority. Jean-Marie Le Pen in 1986 had 10% support in France. His daughter has 26%. There is an attitude in Europe that they are fearful of the Muslim population because there is no integration. Now you say that the idea that the second generation becomes more adaptive to the local scene, that wasn't the case in Britain with the Pakistanis who bombed the underground. They became more radical.
Okay, so I think this is extraordinarily complex, and I always want to have to explain all those problems, right? I have to go fast, right? What I'd like to say very clearly, I work along terrorism specialists, right? And those specialists in particular have been working very closely with both the Victorian police, right, and federal authorities. I do not say that there is no terrorism problem in Europe, nor do I say that there have not been Muslims in Europe that have become hostile to the state. There have been, there's no doubt about it, right? So those who were involved, right, in for example, within the British Pakistani community, or who then forged links with the more sort of Algerian, disgruntled, violent, right, Muslims in France, who then make connection with people in Germany, blah, blah, blah. So I do not deny that at all, right? So I think that you brought in so much here, because you brought in also obviously the failures of French decolonization, which are in fact very specific to France, right? You brought out another issue, which is the racism, right? Because there's no doubt that before the terrorist attacks of 2001, right, there was very strong, right, anti-Algerian, right, racism in France, anti-Paki racism in Britain, right? So there was that, to start with, long before, right? Terrorism and jihadist ideology became the main thing. So the racism and the fear of jihadism merged, right? So I guess that what I'm trying to say is that phenomenon that you talk about is real, right? And it is important, obviously, right, for governments, for the police, right, to contain it. My argument has been is that to a very large extent it has been contained in Europe, right? But the fear that was generated, right, by the fact that there was a fraction, right, of Muslims in Britain, in France, in the Netherlands, you remember the assassination of Theo van Gogh and all the rest of it. The fear of that particular a fraction of Muslims living in Europe, who became violent, generated a mindset, which merged with the American neoconservative interpretation of terrorism as being motivated by a civilizational war, total incompatibility, which then reinforced the pre-existing racism, which was to say Muslims can't live in Western society. They can't, because their religion doesn't allow them. Now, Islam, in fact, exists throughout the world in a great many different countries, right? There are different varieties of Islam, and I do not think it is a valid argument to say that because you are a Muslim, you cannot live in a Western liberal democratic society, right? And where it's more provocative and harder to understand for those people not actually specialists of Islam. That's why I made the distinction between the two forms of fundamentalism. Right? So the peaceful Salafists, right, who grow their own beard, with the women are completely covered, and the violent Salafist jihadists, right? The peaceful Salafists, right, have grown in Europe. They're very visible in a big European cities. You see them. They're extremely unsettling. I find them unsettling as a feminist. Just cringe. Okay? Right? But the fact of the matter is, these are not violent. Because in fact, the jihadists have learned to hide themselves. They no longer grow beards. They're no longer accompanied by a woman or maybe two because they've got a second wife and a whole string of kids. They are invisible, right? Yet those Salafists, right, attract hostility, constant hostility from European societies, and they put under suspicion, right? They are watched, controlled, right? Arrested by the police in the street, right? And what has become even more apparent to me is those Muslims that actually made it into the middle classes, be it in France, in Britain, in Germany, they're starting to feel it, right? They're starting to say, this discourse in Europe is becoming unbearable, right? I am a Muslim, I respect the liberal democratic norms, right? In France, in Germany, in Belgium, right, and in Britain. Yet, all the time, there are articles, right, in the press that peddle generalizations about the fact that all Muslims in Europe are a threat. Right? So that's my very long answer to your comment. There are lots and lots of dimensions to
Thank you very much indeed. Natalie?